You've overseen the deportation of U.S. citizen children and have claimed that their parents chose to take their children with them. But you produce no evidence that the mother, let alone both parents, of those children freely gave consent to have their children deported from the United States. In fact, everyone involved in those cases say that the mothers, in fact, did not want their children, especially their sick American children, deported. In fact, your agency lured families to ICE appointments under false pretenses, lied to them, refused to let them speak with an attorney or children's father, and deported them before a court had time to even hear the case. You've given yourself the unilateral right to deport anyone you deem a threat.
A congressman looked the Homeland Security Secretary in the eye and said, "You took an oath, and you didn't tell the truth." Not once, not twice, but over 3 hours of testimony. This wasn't a closing statement. It was an indictment.
Gentleman yields. I think we've covered everyone. Mr. Ranking Member, you're recognized for a closing statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And I'd like to associate myself with Mr. Garcia's statement. I can't believe that we would send somebody or anyone from our country somewhere else and say, well, we cut off all communication. We're a better country than that. And I just thank Mr. Garcia for raising that question. Secretary Noem, at the start of this hearing, you stood here and took an oath to tell the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Then you sat down and dodged the truth over and over and over for a little more than 3 hours, so help you God. You repeatedly testified that you and the Department of Homeland Security will follow the Constitution, the laws, and the order of the Supreme Court. Well, the Fifth Amendment of the United States Constitution says that no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. And yet, a federal court found that the Department of Homeland Security, under your watch, believes that it has a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process. So you did not tell the truth to this committee today when you said you would follow the Constitution and comply with due process. You also testified that you follow orders of the Supreme Court of the United States and all courts. But the Supreme Court unanimously directed the government to facilitate the return of Kilmar Garcia to the United States. But you just testified before this committee that Kilmar Garcia will never return to the United States. So you didn't tell the truth to this committee again when you said that you comply with court orders and decisions. You've overseen the deportation of U.S. citizen children and have claimed that their parents chose to take their children with them. But you produce no evidence that the mother, let alone both parents, of those children freely gave consent to have their children deported from the United States. In fact, everyone involved in those cases say that the mothers, in fact, did not want their children, especially their sick American children, deported. In fact, your agency lured families to ICE appointments under false pretenses, lied to them, refused to let them speak with an attorney or children's father, and deported them before a court had time to even hear the case. You've given yourself the unilateral right to deport anyone you deem a threat. You refuse to comply with court orders that try to stop you. That puts all of us at risk. Beyond your false testimony about the administration's deportation policies, you falsely stated that the administration is focused on a full range of DHS's missions. Instead, your budget request appears to reflect a view that DHS's sole purpose is to be a border wall construction agency that deports U.S. citizen children with cancer. Your budget proposed cuts to cybersecurity, emergency preparedness, and aviation security. Even before asking Congress for these budget cuts, you've overseen mass reductions in the workforce at CISA and FEMA. Despite repeated requests from this committee on how many people have been fired or have been bullied into quitting before their tenure, DHS has refused to share that information. So it should worry every American that we do not know how many people are left at FEMA to respond to disasters and how many cyber defenders still work at CISA as China and other adversaries attack our systems every day. And you made clear in response to my questioning, you have no written plans for FEMA. It is very apparent that also is no plan for CISA, where you are trying to gut the agency's funding and falsely claiming that CISA is a censorship agency. Since CISA never censored anyone, but now we are all paying the price for you buying into a baseless conspiracy theory. Secretary Noem, I'm glad that you finally came to testify before this committee, but I'm disappointed, along with a lot of my Democratic colleagues, that you stood here and took an oath to tell the truth, then repeatedly failed to do so to this committee. Let me just say, if you dance with the devil long enough, he's liable to follow you home. I hope that you will stop dancing around the truth and start telling the truth so this committee can do its work, helping to defend DHS from the attacks you've launched against it. Mr. Chair,
What just happened here wasn't a partisan rant or a dramatic flourish to end a hearing. It was a constitutional accusation delivered carefully, deliberately, and with receipts. When Congressman Bennie Thompson spoke, he wasn't asking questions anymore. He was doing something far more serious. He was alleging that the Secretary of Homeland Security violated the most basic promise made in a congressional hearing, the oath to tell the truth. That matters more than most people realize. When a cabinet secretary raises their right hand and swears to tell the truth, that oath is not symbolic. It's the legal and moral foundation that allows Congress to perform oversight. Without truthful testimony, Congress cannot write laws, allocate funding, or protect the public. Oversight collapses. Thompson began by reminding everyone of something simple but powerful. America does not disappear people. Or at least it's not supposed to. When he said we're a better country than that, he was pointing to a principle older than any administration, that the government does not cut off communication, ship people overseas, and wash its hands of responsibility. Then he moved to the core contradiction. Secretary Noem repeatedly claimed that DHS follows the Constitution and obeys Supreme Court orders. But Thompson didn't argue this with opinion. He used law. The Fifth Amendment doesn't say citizens, it says no person. That distinction is intentional. Due process is not optional, not conditional, and not dependent on popularity or political convenience. Yet a federal court found that DHS believed it could send residents of the United States to foreign prisons without due process. Not after hearings, not after trials, not after meaningful legal review. That finding alone directly contradicts sworn testimony. And then came the moment that landed hardest. The Supreme Court unanimously ordered the government to facilitate the return of Kilmar Garcia. Not a suggestion, not guidance, an order. Yet Secretary Noem testified that Garcia would never return to the United States. You cannot comply with a court order while openly defying its outcome. Both cannot be true. That's why Thompson said, plainly, you didn't tell the truth. This wasn't rhetorical, it was logical. He then expanded the pattern, and this is where the implications widen beyond one case. Under Noem's leadership, DHS deported U.S. citizen children. The department claimed parents chose to take them, but Thompson pointed out that no evidence was produced showing consent. In fact, according to those involved, the mothers explicitly did not want their children deported, including children who were sick, American citizens receiving medical care. Even more disturbing was how it allegedly happened. Families summoned to ICE appointments under false pretenses, denied access to lawyers, denied contact with fathers, removed before courts could intervene. That's not enforcement, that's evasion. And when the executive branch begins acting faster than the courts can respond, the balance of power breaks. Thompson warned that DHS has effectively granted itself unilateral authority to decide who is a threat, who gets removed, and which court orders matter. That kind of power, once normalized, doesn't stay contained. He then exposed another layer the public rarely connects: resources. While DHS claims to protect the homeland, its budget priorities tell a different story. Cuts to cybersecurity, cuts to emergency preparedness, cuts to aviation security, mass workforce reductions at FEMA and CISA, agencies responsible for disaster response and defending against cyber attacks from adversaries like China. Congress doesn't even know how many staff remain. No transparency, no plan, no written strategy. That's not governance, that's negligence. And when Noem falsely framed CISA as a censorship agency, something even conservative courts have rejected, Thompson called it what it was: buying into a baseless conspiracy theory, then dismantling national security infrastructure because of it. His final warning wasn't dramatic, it was almost quiet. If you dance with the devil long enough, he's liable to follow you home. In other words, when leaders abandon truth, due process, and accountability for power, the damage doesn't stop at their targets. It comes back to everyone. This wasn't about politics. It was about whether truth still matters when sworn under oath, and whether the Constitution still restrains those who claim to protect it. If you want more breakdowns that explain what's actually happening inside these hearings, not spin, not sound bites, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks oversight doesn't matter. It does.